to order. So I'm grateful for everybody who was able to make it this evening. This is our second Police Advisory Board meeting. I know we have a lot of work to do. I'm excited about the work that we've already had an opportunity to begin. So I just want to give a moment for people to review the agenda. I've got it shared on the screen. And I apologize because I saw a message come on the chat and I don't know if I can monitor at the same time as sharing my screen.
I can help. I think it was just Angie letting us know that she's here, but she can't be on camera for a few minutes, but she's here and listening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Angie. No worries on the camera. Okay, so if everybody has a chance to look at the agenda, does anybody see any additions, any modifications that you feel we should make? All right, and I can't see everybody on my screen, so if you are wanting to say something, don't hesitate to go ahead and speak up. There aren't too many people on the meeting, so if you do want to unmute, that is welcome. And if not, then I'll move to accept the agenda. It looks like we can move forward. And the next part of the meeting is that we open for brief public comment on the agenda. So this is a great opportunity for anybody who's joining us from the public to add suggestions to the agenda, add any items that you think might be missing. Is there anyone who would like to add something? Okay, and then just a reminder, as it says at the bottom of the agenda, approximately 6:20-ish, we will open the floor again for any public comment. So I'm going to move us forward. I want to review our mission. That's something that I hope to do each meeting just so we can keep our eye on the goal. The mission of this board is to offer advice to the St. Albans Police Department for the successful implementation of 21st century policing strategies and to assist the police department in following the established roadmap as amended by the City Council. And also a friendly reminder that these documents are available on the City of St. Albans website. So the next order of business is to consider the approval of the meeting minutes that were submitted from our last meeting on January 8th. Has everyone had a chance to review those? And if so, can I get a motion to accept?
This is Danielle. I can make a motion to accept the meeting minutes.
Thank you, Danielle. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
This is Tom. I will second that.
Thank you, Tom. All in favor? Say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. So our next order of business is, I'm going to stop the screen share so we can see each other a little bit better. And I want to thank Danielle for her willingness to do a training for us. I feel like this is going to be extremely beneficial. It looks like somebody's screen is shared. Oh, Jamie, your screen is
It's mine.
shared.
Yep,
Okay.
I'll unshare. Yes.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to
Sorry.
make sure I wasn't sure. No problem. I didn't know if Danielle was hopping into it and had something to share. And feel free, Danielle, if you do have any slides or anything you want to pull up, feel free to do so. But I'm grateful that you're willing to share a little bit with us about results-based accountability, which we hear the terms RBA, and often don't get an opportunity to learn in better detail of what that means. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Danielle. And before I do that, once again, say thank you for being willing to give us this education.
No problem. And I'd hold off on the thank yous until you get the presentation because I'm a bit rusty. I haven't done this in a while, so we'll see how it goes. But I did put together, well, I had a PowerPoint and just modified it a little bit. So I will start from let me go back to share screen. Okay, can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm trying to think what's the easiest. Okay, so who's heard of results-based accountability?
I've heard of it, and received some training, but not a lot.
It was a huge state initiative for a while, and many of our funding dollars were tied to learning and practicing RBA. So there's a big push of about, I don't know, 10 years ago to embrace that and use it in our work. So results-based accountability uses data, it's data-driven decision-making process to help communities and organizations get beyond talking about problems to taking action and solving problems. It is a very simple, common sense framework that everyone can understand. RBA starts with an ends and works backwards towards the means. The end or difference you are trying to make look slightly different if you are working on a broad community level or are focusing on a specific program or organization. So for this purpose, I think that's where we would start from an RBA model, saying like, okay, we've developed this commission, like what is the end goal? If we knew that this was working well and our task force was working well, how would the community look different? How would practice look different? How would law enforcement look different? So that's what's meant by kind of starting at the end and working backward, that you're identifying kind of what your vision is and then developing strategies for what that looks like. So there's a couple of values within results-based accountability, and it's that you use really simple strategies, that it's common sense, it's plain language, you're using minimum paper. Mark Friedman really stresses that if you can't get what you're looking for within 30 minutes, like the data, then you shouldn't be working towards that because it's just not realistic. And you also want this to be useful. And please interject, because one, I haven't done this presentation in a while and I can be a very fast talker. And so if you have questions, grab my attention. So again, we're going to use really simple language. We're going to common sense and make sure that this is useful to everyone. So from a results-based accountability lens, there's really two ways that you can use RBA. You can look at it from a population level, which we are charged with doing, because we're not law enforcement, so we can't go in and change their practice. We can make recommendations, but we are responsible for looking at that population and accountability and the well-being of whole populations. And so an example of that are communities, cities, counties, states, or nations, but again, not an individual organization. So we're looking at the whole population. The second part of results-based accountability is looking really at performance accountability, and that's about the well-being of client populations. And this is, again, it holds programs, agencies, and service systems accountable. So a great example of that is all the data that we were able to get from law enforcement. So we will use that data to inform how it's impacting the client population, and then give recommendations of how law enforcement will then work to turn the curve on their program and performance accountability. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Just digesting it.
Okay. And again, I talk kind of fast. So part of a real important part of results-based accountability is making sure that we're all using common language, because a lot of times I might use the word outcome and somebody else might refer to that as a baseline. And if you're not on the same page with your semantics, it can cause a lot of confusion. And so Mark Friedman really believes that at the very beginning of a process of going through that, we really need to all be on the same page of what language we're using. As you can see, like outcome, result, vision, goal, those can all be used interchangeably. So as a group, we would decide when we're talking about something that we're all going to use outcome, or we're all going to use goal, so that we're making sure that we're using the same language. And so an outcome, result, vision, or goal, that's really a condition of a well-being. And you use that again at the population community-wide level. The next common label is a benchmark, objective, baseline, or indicator. And that's the measure that helps you quantify the achievement of a result. And I'm going to walk through a couple of examples of this stuff in a couple of slides, so it'll make a little bit more sense. Another common label is a strategy, or what works, or options. And this is a coherent set of actions that has a reasoned chance of working to improve results. For performance measure, there's either performance measure or there's performance indicator. And this is a measure of how well a program, agency, or service system is working. So does that make sense? I think that'll be an important step as we move forward, is kind of identifying how we're going to refer to things as we're working through this process.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at RBA, there are 3 important quadrants that you identify, well, 3 kind of practices that you're looking at. And again, I'm going to walk through some of this, so it'll make a little bit more sense. But part of that is how much did we do? So that's one way in how you can measure what you're doing. And that's usually through like an access point. It can be the number of police stops. It can be, like in my world, it's the number of patients that I saw or the number of home visits that my staff provided. So how much did we do? What's the input, the output, resources, process measure? And that definition of it kind of is measures of the quantity or how much effort, how much service was delivered. So then you move into, well, how well did we actually do that? And that is a measure of effort, how well the service delivery and support functions were performed. So that's not the same as like a satisfaction. It's really more about, I'm trying to think of an example of that. It's more around like the program or the person within the agency and the quality of that. And again, this will make more sense in a little bit. And then the third part of that is anyone better off? Like, how do you know? Which is often through consumer satisfaction or customer results. And so it's a measure of the quantity and quality of effect on a customer's life. And again, this is usually done at a program or agency service system. So it's not too much that we'll get into, because again, we're looking at population level health. Another thing that I really appreciate around RBA is that your measures are not always going to improve. There are going to be explanations. There's going to be reasons why things are a barrier to you, and those are really important to identify in this process. And that's what is called story behind the numbers. And so, you know, just in our beginning conversation with law enforcement last month, we were asking for all this different data through email. And they don't have all the data that we're looking for. And so that's an important story behind the number of this explains, it doesn't mean that you can't get there. And that might be a strategy that we recommend to law enforcement, to say, you need to start collecting this. If we don't have this information, we can't show the community that things are improving. So the next part of that is actually developing an improvement plan for what you're going to do to address either your program or the population. Okay. So this is just another way to kind of look at what we just went through. Again, a result or an outcome is the condition of well-being for children, adults, families, or communities. An example of that, children are born healthy, children are safe, there are safe communities, there's clean environment, prosperous economy. A lot of these were taken actually straight from the Agency of Human Services, their population, you know, what they want for healthy or what they want for Vermonters. The next part of that when looking at populations is that you're going to set indicators or benchmarks, which is a measure that helps quantify the achievement of a result. For example, a rate of low birth weight babies, rate of confirmed child abuse, crime rate, air quality index, unemployment rate. A rate for us could be the rate of traffic stops, and then a performance measure around that is unnecessary traffic stops, and looking to change that around Hispanic or Latino or Black populations. So again, that's at the performance measure level of a measure of how well of a program, agency, or service system is working. And again, looking at how much did we do, how well did we do it, and is anyone actually better off? And there's some formats on how to measure that. Okay. Again, we went through this. I'm not going to go through this slide again. So when looking at population accountability, there are 7 really important questions to look at when you're talking about it through an RBA lens. And again, what are the quality of the life conditions we want for children, adults, and families who live in the community? So that should be one of the first questions that we're asking ourselves as we're looking at all the data, and what do we want to see happen down the road if this was successful, if we knew this program or this process was working. What would these conditions look like if we could see them? How can we measure these conditions? How are we doing on the most important of these measures? Who are the partners that have a role to play in doing better? What works to do better, including no cost or low cost? It's really important to emphasize it's actually amazing that, you know, when you look at creating change, so many people go to, well, we don't have the funding, or we don't have the dollars, or it's too much money. But there are a lot of really no cost and low cost things that can come out of, especially, you know, pretty innovative groups and people working together, and again, pulling in community members. And then it's kind of, what do we propose to do? And I will show you a format down the road of kind of what an RBA one-pager looks like. So this again is kind of that the 3-quadrant that you're looking at when you're starting to actually develop your performance measures or your population measures. Again, how much did we do? How well did we do it? And is anyone better off? And so I think for us, we're going to be getting the how much did we do and how well did we do it from the people that we're looking to hold accountable or to improve or to even celebrate and say, this is actually working really well. And then it's really up to us around, how do we know that people are better off? That's really more of the population piece of it. Like, what's changed? What's changed about our community, and how can we measure that in either a point in time? You really, in theory, want to have multiple points in times, but we'll have to see what data we have and kind of dig through that to see what we're able to do. So with RBA, I find that it's easier to go through an example of something that you're not actually invested in right now, because you start to get in your head too much and think about this indicator, that performance, or what measure, whatever. So I'm going to use an example of one that I actually, one of our programs was responsible for a few years ago. And so at the population level, we wanted to look at teen pregnancy rates. And in particular, we were looking at teens who had 2 children and really trying to decrease the second birth. And so part of that is that we had to look at, okay, well, what are the teen pregnancy rates? And we needed to document that and look at that. We needed to start identifying who are the community partners that are involved in the problem, and start looking at, essentially when you're looking at changing data points from an RBA lens, it's referred to as kind of turning the curve. And so as you can see, the state average on this graph, there's a state average and there's a Franklin County average. And so our numbers were going up. And so we had to identify as a group, like, where do we hope to see our numbers? And so through my program, or one of the programs at NCSS, we took this approach. And we started with developing kind of a task force at looking at this. We identified, who do we serve? What do we do? How much do we do it? So those were some of the, it looks like that time the program was serving 17 pregnant teens. We were helping them with GD training. We were helping them with health trainings. We were helping with job placement. And then how well did we do it? Pregnant teens who finished the program, girls that got GD trained, who received the health training, the percentage of it, who actually ended up with stable employment. And then we also looked at our best practices, employed collaborations, and partnerships. And then how did we know anyone was better off? There was a 70% of pregnant teens did not become pregnant a second time. 90% of the program participants received a high school diploma or took a college course. 30% of the participants gained employment during the program. So it doesn't look like we at that point had completed the story behind the numbers. But again, so you're going to kind of want to look at, how is what your program doing actually impacting the population? And I'm going to go through another thing. So my computer's thinking, hold on. Okay. So these were the benchmarks that we kind of looked at to say, how can we hold ourselves accountable and actually see that there's change in behavior, or there's improved skills and knowledge, and that our program is actually affecting pregnant teens. And then again, the overall population accountability of decreasing birth rates. So that is some of the data from that particular program. So this is actually what kind of a one-pager looks like. So you kind of start with, what's the result? Like, what population are you wanting to impact? You lay out your trend lines. You start to identify what are the actual story behind the numbers, and then who are the partners that are involved. And you kind of lay out, like, here are the ideas that we want to move forward with. And then this is RBA in a nutshell. Again, there's 2 ways to look at it: population and performance. when you're looking at performance measures, it's how much did we do it? How well did we do it? Is anyone better off? And then you're kind of always evaluating your baselines and where you're at and turning the actual curve. So I know that was a lot of detail and it was quick because I wanted to do kind of the quick and dirty, but I do have other things that I could pull up if that would be helpful. I'm not sure what would be most helpful for this group. Or if you have questions, do you want me to review something else?
I think that was pretty clear, but I think more is probably always better if
Okay.
you're willing to do that.
Yep, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second and look in my files because I had pulled together a couple other things.
And Danielle, while you're looking, one of the questions that came to my mind was, so the teen pregnancy component, you had a very specific goal, but do you have, and I don't want to use language that RBA doesn't use, but like a lagging indicator, like is there a longer term indicator that comes with that, right? Like if we reduce teen pregnancies today, 3 years from now, what's the indicator that we're hoping to impact? Is it our economic well-being? Is it, child and childcare? What was the long-term goal?
So from, because of the work that I am correlated with, most of our long-term goals are connected to the Agency of Human Services, like AHS outcomes. And so a part of that I want to say is like reduced rates of child abuse and neglect, or youth successfully transition into adulthood. Like, if you're changing the trajectory of that, that's going to help people transition into adulthood successfully, or access to education for youth. There was probably like 10 or 12 of them, but that would be kind of the long term that you would hope in the end run. Those are the things that are impacted.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. When you think you're like all organized and then you can't find it.
Zoom makes it a little tricky. Belinda, I can't see the raise your hand function. That doesn't mean it's not here, but I'm just wondering if other folks have it.
Yeah, so well, hold on. Let me just make sure that people have the ability to do that. Because I haven't seen any hands raised, but I believe people have the ability to do that.
And I use Teams most of the time, so Zoom is a little dicey for me. So it could totally just be me, but I thought I would ask in case others were having that experience.
Okay, yeah, because it should, last meeting, I believe we got some hands up. So when you click on, yeah, I'm seeing raised hand under the reactions. So if you go to reactions, I'm just raising mine to show what it would look like. So when you click on the reactions, right below all of the fun emojis is the raise hand. So if anybody does want to raise their hand, then they can definitely do that. I can call on you, and then I can lower people's hands from my end as well.
My computer's being really slow. It's thinking.
No problem. Yeah, Danielle, I'm really grateful for that information, because like I said, I remember when this first started kind of hitting our county. It was close to 10 years ago. It feels like it was maybe 8-ish years ago. And what I would love to do is find a way to, hi Winnie, welcome. I just saw your chat. What I'd love to do is find a way, like maybe an example, even if you were to pull out an example that could be applicable, but isn't necessarily specific to what we're going to be dealing with. But maybe an idea of how we could use this as a team and as a board moving forward. And I think you did that to some degree. But any other examples you can come up with? Because I feel like for this team, our goal, we're a police advisory board, right? We're not a police accountability board. We're not, our role is very defined, where we want to be informed all over the place on everything. However, we want to stay in our lane when it comes to action steps and action items. And I feel like using RBA to make decisions based on the data that we receive is going to help us be more successful in the long term. I was speaking with Jamie recently too, and in my brain, it's like, oh my gosh, we have so much work to do. We recently received a ton of data. It really takes a lot of time to thoughtfully go through it and sift through it. So the beauty of it is that the expectation isn't for us to to institute change immediately, but it's to do it in an effective, informed way. But analyzing the data that we are receiving is by far the first step. And I think also having the framework of, once we're looking at it and identifying areas that we could put more focus and start talking about creative ideas to bring solution or change in a positive way, how would we do that in accordance with RBA? So that's kind of where my brain is at right now.
So here's kind of an RBA one pager that we use at Northwestern Counseling. And it's helpful because we've kind of gone in and have written in, like, this is what you should be included in these sections. So I think, to be honest, when I've been going through this and thinking about this group, I think this group really needs to spend some time on those 7 population accountability questions of, like, what are we hoping to look like? And again, if we knew that we were doing a good job, how would things look differently? Like, what is the, because it is a ton of data, and I wasn't able to, spend a lot of time going through all of it, but figuring out, like, what do we want to impact? And, around those principles, if we were doing that well, what would look different? And so I think what we'd want to identify, I can walk you through kind of the last community-wide RBA exercise that I did. It was actually, so it came from the hospital, and you know how they do their health assessment every couple of years, and they have so many different areas that they want to, you get your trend lines. And one of them was that Franklin County had really high obesity rates. And so the hospital itself can't be responsible for impacting obesity rates. Like, there are multiple community partners that are part of that. So we developed they brought a group of probably like 20 different community partners and said, we all have a role in this. And so let's talk about that. And so we did is we looked at the data, and then we developed, we said, what do we want to see differently? And part of that was that outside of the city, there aren't walking paths in a lot of towns. And so that was a very concrete, the program outcome statement was, we want to increase walking paths in rural areas. And so that was one of the groups, the subcommittees kind of measure. And so they started with, in Franklin County, there are 5 walking paths. We want to see 11 walking paths. And so part of that was then, okay, identifying the story behind the baseline. Like, well, why is that? And it's because, maybe the small towns hadn't been pulled in. There was a lack of funding. It wasn't really on anybody's, actually, I think, anyway, I'm going back and forth. And so we started to look at that, and then identifying what works in your community. Like, are there areas in Enosburg where a walking path would be more accessible for someone, or in Berkshire versus, St. Albans is different than when you're out in the community, or out in Enosburg or Berkshire. Then who are the community partners? Who can help you turn the curve? Who is involved, or who should be involved? And then what are your specific proposal to improve the performance? And then you start to lay out your action plans. And so for them, it was, we're going to meet with the town of Enosburg and start talking about this. We're going to apply for a federal grant. And I should have led with, part of what came out of that work group is actually the implementation of RISE. And so they needed an entity to start moving this work forward. And so RISE became that entity, and then they became in charge of the performance measures that was then going to impact population health around obesity.
That's a great example, Danielle. Thank you. And I do see we've got a couple of questions. So Winnie put, there's a couple, couple here. So Winnie had a question about, let me go back up. So one question, how are we going to validate the data is accurate? So, and I think that is a good question. I think, when we are requesting data and we receive it, we can ask those questions on what measurements are used. If it's not already clear in the presentation of the information, that's where we can have an opportunity to ask more questions, especially if there's certain areas. I don't have all the answers. I feel like maybe if I had an example, it would be easier to point to that answer, but I think that that's a good thing to talk about, that if there's something that we receive that we feel like, well, I'd like to really know where that came from. What are the measurements, or what is the practice around collecting that information? That's something that we can drill into more. So if that comes up with something specific, I think that would be a great thing for this board to talk about. Does anybody else have any other feedback or questions about that or thoughts?
I think Mo is on with us, but I know, this was one of the questions that we asked him when we were gathering the data as well. And Mo, are there statewide standards or requirements for data collection or national requirements for law enforcement data collection at this point?
Hello, the only statewide requirements are for the race data collection for tickets. That's the only requirement.
So I know in healthcare, we're held to a pretty high standard. So, that's the world I know. And the government does require that we collect certain data. But at some point, you sort of have to take what you have and then you have to kind of work it a little bit, right? And so I think if we look at the complaint data, which I know is pretty well parsed out, and we have a belief either from us as a board or our community members are saying that doesn't line up with what we believe to be true, then we should do a deeper dive on that, right? And that can be part of our work. At some point, and this is true in healthcare too, you sort of just have to say, okay, this is our starting point, this is us, and let's find out if this is really us, but we have to start somewhere. And so it's so easy to kind of get hung up in that, is my sort of caution from the work that I do. But I think we have every right to question it as we work through and ask Mo those detailed questions.
And Jamie, you had put a note that you wanted your hand up, and then I also see Winnie's hand up. So I don't know if you want to get your question first, Jamie, and then I'm going to go to Winnie because her hand also came up.
My question kind of shifts topics, so probably Winnie first, if it's related to the data question.
Okay, Winnie? Well, we can't hear you. And you're not muted, which is strange. If you click on your microphone, there's an arrow pointing up, and you should have an option to test the speaker and microphone to make sure it's connected. Yeah, I can see that you're talking and I see that your device is not muted, but I'm not hearing you. The only other thing I can think of is if you have a cell phone that you can call in to connect to the audio, that might work. Or maybe type in the chat. Is that what you're doing? Okay, I see a smile. So I'll give Winnie a chance to either call in on a cell phone to connect to audio or to type her next question in the chat. This is where we get to love technology.
Same thing happened to me the other day, Winnie, exactly what you're experiencing. It's super frustrating.
Yeah, the only other thing I can think of is, as I said, in the bottom left-hand corner of the Zoom screen, there's the microphone that you would click on to mute and unmute, and there's a little arrow to the right of it. And if you click on the arrow, it shows the option and kind of in the middle that says test speaker and microphone. Sometimes that will show clarity. Okay, so Winnie did put in the chat, you just opened it up, saying the history lately is the data from police is not the whole story.
I think that would be an interesting point from an RBA. So if that's, then where do we get the other data? Because that's the piece that I think this group needs to figure out. If we are hearing from the community that things are differently, how do we quantify that and get that?
I guess I would need to know what data.
Yeah. She said from the parties' concerns. So, and yeah, so I think that it's one of those things where it's really hard to come to know how to answer it without having a situation or an example. Like if there's a specific example, let's say that we're looking at the data that we received from Mo on a report, and it's not aligning to data that another person or organization has. The one solution that comes to my mind is, well, let's connect with that other source and try to find out where the missing link is or where the parameter might be different, that moving forward we could include more details. I don't really know how to answer it without an example.
I can speak to how I would think that I'm guessing that the big three pieces of data you guys are talking about right now are the response resistance, the traffic, and the internal affairs data. I can speak to how those came to be. I don't think that you have any other data that really would be questioned at this point. other than the police officer's background and stuff, which really isn't, that is what it is. So I can speak real quick to how those all come to play. The traffic stop data is every time an officer does a ticket, issues a ticket and or a warning, or goes to a crash. Those are the 3 times. Anytime you have that, you go to a crash, issue a warning, issue a traffic stop. That data is collected on the back of one of those 3 pieces of paper. It's sent to the Judicial Bureau or entered into what's called web crash, which is where all crashes are reported. And the state compiles that data. In addition, it is also entered by our dispatchers or our officer, depending if there's a crash or a ticket or warning. Then that data is compiled statewide and put into the report you just got from Seguino. And also we did it ourselves for 2020 so that Melinda would have it before, because it takes, as you see, years to get the 2014 to 2019 report. So that's where that data comes from. The IA, the internal affairs data, that is collected internally. If somebody makes a complaint, whether it's anonymously, Facebook, Twitter, however we get the complaint, but most do come right to the barracks or to the building. Somebody knocks on the door, calls in a complaint. It should be taken by a sergeant level at the minimum, but it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes a dispatcher takes it. We ask the person to fill out a form if they come in person, but if they don't, we take down the information over the phone or however we do, and it immediately goes to internal affairs investigator, lieutenant, and he puts it on the form so we know that we took a complaint, and that's how that's documented as a number, as a complaint. As a response to resistance, that one is even more thoroughly numbered, because everybody that was there, from the officer that did the response to resistance, or there's 3 officers there, they all have to notify the supervisor. So there's no way those get missed. It's a checks and balances system, so that it never, and it has happened in the past years. In past years, it used to be incumbent on the supervisor to do those response resistance forms, whether they were on scene or not. The officer just told them about it, and they in turn did the report. That didn't make any sense. We changed that policy. Now the person that did the actual response resistance does the form, which is the way it should have been all along. And even if you were there as a witness to it and you had no part of it, you still have to report it, so that those are all accounted for. So that's how those systems kind of take place. And that's how we don't think any are going to fall through the cracks. I can't speak for historically years ago. I can't even speak for the beginning of 2020, to be honest with you. By going back through the internal affairs lieutenant, who's been in place for multiple years, we believe we have everything accounted for in 2020 that we've heard about. And the response resistance, we absolutely do. And the tickets, there's no way those get missed that I can think of.
I'm not sure that's what Winnie was saying.
What's that?
Right.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I don't think that's what Winnie was saying. I think that she meant that your data is one piece of the picture. And so
she's absolutely right about that.
So I think that's kind of where we were brainstorming. Like, I think about my role at NCSS. I don't gather any data from people to say as part of the intake, like, have you experienced, any, something that would contribute to this task force. And so I think this task force is responsible for thinking, if we need to get data from other places that illustrate the larger picture, where can we get that from?
Yeah, so we could do a survey. I mean, there's things we can do, surveys to try to get and kind of incite some data from the public. We've thought about that ourselves and how we can get this. I don't know. I'm open to ideas, suggestions.
Yeah,
And I think we have to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
I think we have to work with city council if we want data to come from someone other than the police or law enforcement. I just sort of thinking through our scope. I think if we want those things, I think we have to work through city council and ask for like a third party independent, which Winnie is what I think you would be looking for, right? A third party. I'm going to take that as good. And so that may be very well a suggestion that we make to city council to ask for that to accompany the data that you've provided. Mo, does that make sense?
No, it does. And I know that the survey way has popped up in other places across the country. I don't know how effective it is, but I know it's happened.
Thank you. Yes, and Winnie, thank you, because that's a fantastic suggestion. And I'm sorry with the barrier of the microphone, but it sounds like we got what you were trying to say, and it is a fantastic idea.
Yes, I'm sorry. I understand now what you're saying.
No, that's all good. It's all good. I think it was, I saw that she put that note and I was going to mention that after, but I also felt like it was helpful for us to kind of hear what you were saying, to be aware of that in case that question was to come up in the future too. And it looks like we do have a comment from Angela saying, I'm glad the police are open to suggestions from the advisory board on filling in gaps in data and verifying the accuracy of data reported.
Well, the deal is, if what we don't know, we don't know. And as far as data, like I told you before, our system is pretty antiquated. We can do some things, but some things it's just not built to do. So we're going to have to think outside the box, or we're just not going to get it. So.
Yep, absolutely. And Jamie, would you like to address your hand up?
Yeah, so my original question back to Danielle, although it kind of aligns with this, I think, is you mentioned, I feel like you said 7, and now I feel like we've lived a whole life since I thought of this question, but the domains that you were talking about for population health. And so then how would we pick maybe all 7 of them apply, right? But how would we then align them with this data and maybe even third-party data that we get from the community? I'm just trying to think about how we avoid too much scope creep with our work, because those population health ones, I imagine, can be pretty big and all-encompassing.
I think we would need to maybe dedicate, and I don't know, I know we had talked a little bit like, is this the only time this group meets? Because I think we would need to dedicate at least half of a meeting to walking through an exercise of going through those population health questions and then correlating the data that Mo was able to give to us and say, where does it fit into this condition? Does this data impact this condition? And you start to kind of match it up. I know that doesn't explain it super well, but that's the format that I'm kind of familiar with. And then I think, to be honest, that's going to also tie into a little bit of, what Winnie is saying, is that this is not just about law enforcement, because there are other organizations and entities that impact the work of law enforcement and impact what we're trying to manage, change, or address. And so how do you then pull in that data or those people so that they can also have an impact on this work?
Yeah, I know we also had talked about last meeting doing making kind of a map of who our partners and service providers are in the area. And I've heard this at, I can't say how many meetings I've been to in the last month, that the need for that. We've had access to the Franklin County resource guide that was published, but the newest one I know of was in 2020, and there have been changes since then. I know United Way have done some great resource guides, the Messenger has, but I know that's something as a community, a number of community partners are looking for ways to get like one central document. And I know it's been years that we've been looking to do something like this, and it feels as though we get a little bit closer, but I also think that would be a fantastic tool for us to have access to. So when we do identify a need for a special information from service providers, that we know who are the agencies and organizations that are providing those services that we can even reach out to, who are the options to connect with to get information. So that's something that I'm keeping my ear to the grindstone to find out if and when something will be published next, because I do know of a few resources, but not one central location as of yet. And I don't know if anybody's aware of anything else in the works, with whether it be through the Messenger or United Way.
Well, I think I've told you, Melinda, we made up the 1,000 that we made the short forms, and we've given out almost all 1,000 of ours. So we're going to be looking to make up some more. So let me know if you want to. And Messenger did ours. We paid for it.
Okay.
And like I said, they went out. We made the first ones in October, and we're just about empty again. So
Wow.
Let us know if you want to do it. It's a trifold, both sides. So there's maybe, I'm going to guess here, 30, maybe 35 different resources on there. And that seemed to be the one that was most beneficial for us, because it was so much smaller and easier, and people literally folded it. Mostly when we give it to them, they fold it and put it in their pocket, so they're not just tossing it. And it was very effective for us. So, and people have asked for it and actually called asking for more. So if you want to hook up for that, we can definitely try to work on more, at least make sure we're not missing any resources.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you.
I was just kind of, oh, go ahead, Jamie.
I was just your question about the amount of time that we would need to dedicate to that, and the thinking that we may need some additional time together that's just focused on that work, because I think we got some clarification from the city, St. Albans City, just on how to make sure that we're doing that carefully and within the rules of public meetings. And so it would have to be an announced meeting, but we could announce that that was just our focus, and it may be worth at the end of this, Melinda, exploring doing an add-on meeting where we just focus on how we are going to use RBA and the data, and also what data we're missing.
Yeah, I was just looking at the five kind of areas around this, and I think that's the first thing that you would start to do. So for like example, recruit, hire, and select best officers possible. That's where you start to build, like, what do you already have in place? And if we were doing this really well, are we looking for something to be different, and start identifying those strategies around it? And so each area kind of would have its own little action plan of what we'd want to do, because there's a lot to cover.
So it does feel like it would be a good action step to plan on a meeting specific to work on that data, separate from the monthly board meetings. So that's something that, you know, I'd like to find out from this team who would be interested in attending, what would work for you. I feel like trying to figure out the answer of what time and day works for everybody before the end of this meeting might be a challenge, but it's something that we can make sure that once we determine the day and time, that the city will notify you know, the public if and when we hold that meeting. Yep, I see Winnie's hand up. Oh, that you want to be part of it? Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you were having comments. So yeah, so I think that's what I'm going to do is, thank you, Chris. I see that Chris is interested too. So what I will do is send out an email in the next 24 hours to gauge the interest and do one of the most fun tasks ever, which is scheduling, because I really want to make sure that everybody who's interested in attending that meeting can. So we'll find a day and time that would work for everybody. And while we're on that topic, just broad stroke too, that moving forward, we've discussed to some degree and noted that it may not be the best day of the week to be meeting on the, or I should say not the best day of the week or the week of the month, to be meeting on the second Friday for our board meeting, for a number of reasons, including scheduling with the city council's board meeting that and that I'll put that on myself. It was something I didn't think through when we put in to schedule the first board meeting, but it would be great if we could have a little bit more strategic timing on when we have this police advisory board meeting. So moving forward, again, the city of St. Albans will make sure that I'll notify you all by email, and then the announcements will be made so everybody's informed. But chances are the next police advisory board meeting may be on a different day of the week and week of the month, just so we can make sure that we're being strategic in how and when we meet. So for both of those items, the data meeting and the next police advisory board meeting, I will send an email out in the near future so we can, as a team, figure out when would be the next, what would be the best way to schedule that so it works for everyone. So that's an action item I have on myself. Okay, and then Danielle, and so, let me just make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat, but in summary, with your training, is there, when we look at, like, we're going to segue shortly on the agenda into the, into talking about some of the data that I did send out. And I feel like if we could somehow do a strategic way of going through that data as a board, like how would we like to do it? In my mind, I was thinking, let's start from the top and work our way down. That being said, that may not be the best approach. So I was curious what other board members felt as far as looking at all that data that I had sent out in the email the other day, looking at the roadmap and the items underneath it, and determining where a good starting place would be, whether it be the place of most interest for anyone, or if you feel like we ought to do it in an organizational fashion, starting with the first one. I'm curious on what everybody's feelings are. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I think it's, at least from my perspective, it's fine to kind of go down the roadmap, bullet point by bullet point. But I do think that it would be really good for us to start sort of corralling ourselves a little bit and focusing on one aspect of the roadmap at a time, because it's feeling to me a little bit like this kind of holistic big picture approach is you know, we need to kind of start honing in, and I'm really appreciative of this. I've already forgotten the acronym, I apologize. But
No, the RBA.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
This feels like a good initial step to organizing our thoughts. But yeah, I have no problems going, you know, bullet point by bullet point down the roadmap, but focusing on one, you know, seems like the right move to me.
Thank you.
I had previously shared with Melinda, I was thinking number 2 stuck out to me as the place to start, because that seems to be the one that encompasses the most response from the community. And then the other items sort of impact it, right? So if you're talking about complaints and internal investigations and traffic stops and all of those things that really touch the community members, and then who we hire as officers, how they're trained, you know, wellness and safety, all community engagement, all of those things should have an impact on that data, right? So in theory, if we're doing everything around 2 correctly, then we should start to see a change in 2's data and whatever other data that we can pull from the community. So I was thinking that 2 was a good place to start and then build out into the rest of them. But I think, Danielle, some of that would depend on some of the population health information that you have too, and maybe that aligns differently.
No, I think that makes sense. I think just initially what you said with number 2, you're talking about embrace community engagement, fair and impartial policing, and build community. Yeah, I think we start looking at what is the data that impacts that. Are there other data points that we would want to request through the city to get? And then that's when you really start going through the 7 population questions that if you were just looking at this, what would we want to see different? And then start kind of identifying those, and then the data points that would go with it. And then you kind of do that turn the curve activity.
And Winnie, I suspect that that's where we would also, whatever information we get from a third party would sort of fit into that space as well. Okay.
And do any other board members have thoughts or want to weigh in?
That makes sense to me.
Okay, great. And in looking at the data that was sent, and thank you for your patience as we got it out to you. And I know there was a lot of information there, so it's going to take some time to really digest it all. But I'm wondering, Jamie, if now would be a good time to attempt a screen share. And I thank you so much for this, because that's my part of my technical issue here is pulling up but I'm thinking if we could look at the set number 2.
Yes, absolutely. Is there anything in particular that any of the particular data elements that you would like me to pull from number 2? So we have the total breakdown of complaint data, which is here in a PowerPoint, internal investigations, traffic stops, and then the Seguino, which I hope I'm saying that right, Mo, but that document that is, I think, has some benchmarking data, but it's just that's just our statewide data. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Seguino was hired, it was prior to 2014. I'm guessing here. It was right around 2012 to start putting together, it was a project to begin with, but it's basically to start putting together some data just to see where the state police fell. And then it quickly became apparent that maybe we should start collecting for every department in the state. And then it became mandated that every department in the state has to put their data into this data bank so that they can draw from it and see where every department in the state of Vermont is. And to be honest with you, I think there's still a couple that are not putting their data in, but there's some, I don't know if there's fines levied with that, but nonetheless, almost every department is putting in now. So yeah, it's just kind of an idea to see where you fall. But I can tell you there's several problems with it. And it's not them, it's not Sequino, it's the process. And what I mean by that is the training started out very poor on how to accurately put in data. And then the process of extrapolating data was very poor. It's getting better and better and better. And I think if you looked at the number of unknown when it comes to race, gender, and such on the back of a ticket, at the beginning in 2014, the numbers are high, really high. There were thousands and thousands of tickets that didn't have that information. Now by 2019, and certainly by, I think 2020, we have zero, and most have close to zero. But the numbers are going to, so it wasn't really as accurate back then as it is now. But nonetheless, it's a great place to start. What makes it so important is that the traffic stop really is the only place where the officer is completely discretion based. Meaning the officer, when you stop somebody, first of all, just so you may not be aware of this, and if you are, I apologize for just repeating what you already know, but you are not allowed to ask somebody their race. So when you stop somebody and you check that box in the back, you are simply, for lack of a better word, you are guessing their race. You may know it, you may not, but you are simply putting down, checking a box that was supplied to you by the Vermont Judicial Bureau, one of, I think it's 5 categories. You are putting what you believe the race to be, and you are writing a ticket warning or letting them go on a verbal warning based on what you want to do, your discretion. So they felt that was the best way to get an indication of what people in the state of Vermont police officers are doing with people they're stopping when it's completely their discretion. They collected on crash data, the same data, because they feel that those are interactions where people, the general motoring population, has gotten themselves in a situation where police officers are responding on a crash. It's a good place to collect data, just to give you a general idea of who is actually driving in the state of Vermont. It's a way to take into account out-of-staters and in-staters, because both are traveling through the state of Vermont and getting in crashes. So it gives the police a chance to collect that data and find out who's actually driving. The issue with that, again, is that it's based on who you think you're dealing with. You are unable to ask people. And sometimes it's, at least for me, it's very difficult to know exactly what somebody's race is. So that is a little skewed in that way. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying you have to take into account that it's a little skewed, but it is a good way to get some type of baseline for us.
I wonder, can we pull up the stop data spreadsheet, Jamie?
Yes, we can. I just want to make sure I'm getting the right.
And thank you for that, Mo, because I know we've spoken a few times, and as you've sent the information, you've given me some of the backstory on it, just like you just did. And I think it's so helpful. And that's another piece, is that I know that our board members, we all have varying degrees of experience with law enforcement or knowledge of how things work. And I think the more that we can learn, the better. Okay, let me put myself.
Yeah, it's a great system. I think it was necessary, and it was an eye opener for some people in general, but I think it's good. It's just, I don't know of any other way the state could do it. So I think this is the way to do it.
Can you see the spreadsheet?
We can, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
thank you so much. Yeah.
Is this the one that you were looking for, the 2020?
It is.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a little confusing.
And one of the things that we can, the beauty of an Excel, right, is always that you can
Data sort.
Right? But there are some data points here. And one thing that I did do, not that I didn't trust these numbers, but I went through and did a sort on the data as well, just to make sure that the math was all good. And this was the same numbers that I came up with. I am not a math genius, but
I'm sorry, I didn't want you to click away from this real quick, but those are the categories. Just so you know, those categories right there, those are the ones supplied by the Judicial Bureau. That's what every officer in the state of Vermont, those are the choices they have for every ticket, warning, crash, and arrest. Those are the choices they have.
Thank you.
I have a question. And before we get down into it, is there a reason why on one of the forms, and this was brought to my attention in the supermarket today, in Price Shopper today, that if I was aware that one of the description is white, Hispanic, or colored, that is wrong on so much level.
if I heard you right, Winnie, you're a little bit echoey, but those 5 that you are seeing right now, those are the only ones we can choose from right there.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
So there's no form, there's no way that they refer to African American people or dark skin colored people as colored.
No, those are the only ones the Judicial Bureau puts out in the state of Vermont right there. I don't know if you can see the screen, but I can read them to you, but it's just Asian Pacific Islander is number 1, Black is number 2, Hispanic is number 3, Native American, Alaskan Native is number 4, white is number 5.
Okay, so at the town council meeting, this is what this person was telling me today, and I just listened, and I told her, if you have a problem with this, pick it up with the board or call message or something. I can't give you no information about it because I don't even know about it. I'm not even supposed to allow to speak about this. But she claimed that at one of the town board meetings that the word colored was described, was the word used to describe African American people. And you took full responsibility for that and said you were going to change that.
No, that's what she's probably referring to as Monday night's meeting. So Monday night's meeting, which was a city council meeting, in our data, we'd originally put down, instead of Black, we had put down the community of color, which wasn't my terminology, but I'm responsible for it because I presented the slide. So I take responsibility for that, but that wasn't one of these 5 categories. That's what we had put down when we were talking about our data, not the state's data. I don't know if that clarifies it or not, but that was this Monday night that just went by.
Yeah, well, like I said, I wasn't aware of this, and I was just disturbed about it because I was like, in 2021, someone will deal with a file that describes a race as color, and knowing the indication of those words. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. No, that was
I
it.
think that person's listening to this meeting as well.
Yep. That was written on one of our forms. It was written as community of color, and like I said, I take responsibility for it because it came out of my office. So I apologized, and that was written. It wasn't meant any disrespect. It wasn't meant, that was the way they wrote it, but was not meant to represent the way these 5 categories at all. That was not the context it was in. And I don't know if that clarified it for you, but that's where that came from. I'm sure that's where that came from.
So Mo, that's never been a choice, or isn't
No.
recently a choice on the form? Okay.
No, those 5 categories, I know they've changed over the years. I mean, I've been doing this, almost 22 years now. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't written a ticket in a long time. I haven't been in that position, but those categories have altered a bit in the last 22 years, but I don't know to what extent, but I know they have changed.
Does anybody else have questions on this form that's pulled up on the stop data? Okay, and I don't see hands going up, so let me get my camera back on. So I'm thinking that, Mo, do you recall what form that language was on? Because if I'm not mistaken, it's already been corrected, correct, right?
Yeah, it was on, I can tell you, just give me a second. Because I know what it looked like. I just gotta tell you for sure here.
I was thinking it was one of the pie graphs, but
It was one of the pie graphs. I just want to make sure you know which one. It would have been on response resistant, slide number 3.
Okay, and I wonder if you can pull that up just so we can be, sorry, Jamie, if you could pull that up, Jamie, so we can be looking at what Winnie was referring to.
Response resistance. That is, here we go.
There, yeah.
And can everybody see that?
If you go to slide 3, and I'm doing this by memory because I actually changed it. And I believe on Monday night it said white on the right in the little box. Yep, I believe it said white, and I think it said and I'm going by memory. I think it said Asian community, and community of color for black, is I think what it said. And now that's what it says. Which
Right, so
now
let's-
those 3 terms are right off the Judicial Bureau.
Thank you.
Perfect. Does that
Which is
bring you
what it should, which is what it
clarification?
should have been.
Oops, sorry.
No, that's okay. And Wendy, does that bring you clarification? Is that the, okay, so that was the point that you were talking about.
Yeah, I apologize. Like I said, that shouldn't have happened that way. It came out of my office. I apologize.
Okay. So, and when we look at this, maybe starting from the first slide.
Yep. Do you want me to go talk about these, or do you want
Yeah,
to
I
look
was
at
just
them?
I was just thinking, yeah, Mo, if you could, just a brief narrative on this, because looking at the numbers, yeah, we'd just love to kind of get your
Yeah,
take.
so this is just a breakdown of the response resistance for 2020. So we had 11,764 calls for service, 725 arrests. In those contacts, we had 37 use force or response resistance. So 37
Mo,
times.
can you just define response to
I will.
resistance? So, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so that means 37 times we put our hands on somebody other than a compliant handcuffing. So compliant handcuffing means that you ask somebody, sir, ma'am, can you turn around? You're under arrest. Can you turn around, put your hands behind your back? They turned around, put their hands behind their back, and you went up and put your handcuffs on them. You clicked one handcuff, clicked the other handcuff, double locked them, and they walked to the car with you, and that was it. That's compliant handcuffing. If you walked up to them and so much as put one handcuff on and they tensed up and started pull away one hand and you grabbed their wrist, that's no longer compliant handcuffing. That requires response to resistance. That's as minimal as it can get, all the way up to lethal force, which we didn't have any this year, thankfully. But that response resistance is anything beyond clicking 2 handcuffs on and then being compliantly put in the car. So of these, just to clarify, I was talking about today with one of the other guys. I didn't run the number on this, and I should have, but I can tell you that at least half a dozen of these were pulling people off the roof of the parking garage by grabbing them from the back, the side, the arm, and pulling them off when they, try to jump off the roof, which is happening about once every 10 days. Those are response to resistance. Even though we didn't arrest them, once you put hands on somebody, you have to do this form. So at least a half a dozen of these are those in the last couple of months, and probably several more before I started sitting in there in July. But those also fall under response resistance. So response resistance doesn't even mean it resulted in an arrest. Anytime you took somebody into custody or grabbed them for a mental health case where you are doing it as part of their welfare, if you put hands on somebody that they weren't compliant with, it's a response resistance.
So Mo, given that the 37, then 11,764 are our denominator, not just those that were arrested, right?
Those are case numbers. That's your total denominator. That's correct.
Thank you.
11,764.
Can I just make a comment? Because I just, from an RBA lens, Mo, like hearing you say that every 10 days somebody is attempting to jump off of the parking garage and that impacts this data point. I feel like that's a clear strategy and point to say, this is where we start to pull in other people to say, like, what can we do to address this? Because
great question. This has been an ongoing issue since I got here. We have one person that, Melinda's aware of this person, and we've had this discussion. NCSS has talked to this person 1,000 times. We've been through a ton of different resources. We've trespassed some from the parking garage just to have, I know it's a piece of paper, just to try to talk them away from going there. We've had discussions with the city about putting up the suicide prevention fences up there. We've got to come up with, as you all know, we've had one person did jump off it.
yes,
it is a magnet when it comes to people that are suicidal. We are there constantly. So a lot of these use of force, not a lot of these, but there are several times when it does come to that. A lot of times we talk them off successfully. Honestly, 99 times out of 100, because it does work. But there are a few times when we've had to grab them by the back of the jacket, their arm. And that's why it results in some of these, but it is a major issue.
well, I just think about it from the lens of also like community engagement. Like, one, they're either doing it for mental health concerns, or two, they're doing it because in an impulsive, I don't want to deal with law enforcement, I'm just going to do this. And so there are community engagement strategies as well to knock down like the stigma of like, do you really want to jump off of a parking garage, or would you rather just, you know, you got to take accountability with law enforcement. And so we can change how law enforcement might be interacting with you and changing that community engagement. And so that just felt like I needed to say that from an RBA lens of those are examples of things that we can look at as a task force.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. We ran the numbers to see it. Most of them are between midnight and 4 in the morning, so nobody's coming out to assist us with it. So it's very difficult. I have great videos of our officers speaking to somebody for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and getting them from standing on the edge to sitting on the edge to coming back in. But they're long drawn out cases.
But the point about that is, are these officers trained to deal with someone with a mental health situation?
And the answer is very minimally.
So I would, from a layman's point of view, I would think that the police will escalate someone that is going through a mental situation. And it brings it to my opinion that we should have more mental health and emotional, what do you call it, social workers and drug counselors at the, or working along with the police in this situation. Because for a police taking 2 hours to do something that probably the mental health worker has the skills and the training to do will take less time.
No, I could agree more, but the issue is that we're lucky we have one during the day. So it's very difficult to get those because they're just as strained for people as we are.
Winnie, I think if you switch your audio all the way over to your phone, you won't have that echo anymore. I'm sure that must be hard to speak through.
But yes, that ideally we would have multiple mental health crisis intervention specialists with us on every shift. But we're fortunate to have the one we do have Monday to Friday, but it'd be awesome to have them at night too. But it's a work in progress across the state, probably across the nation.
So Mo, even if, and I know that we changed our policy and worked with St. Albans PD on it, but even if you would have come to like the hospital and had to lay hands on somebody there, that would have counted in this. Is that right? That's
correct. Any time it goes beyond compliant handcuffing, there has to be a response resistance form. Yeah. That's correct.
So then I think, Danielle, that's having a little bit of lived experience in this space from being a community partner on the flip side of that. That's a takes a village moment because it is a super challenging space. So it is a good example of data that we could impact, by looking at it holistically and doing things a little bit differently. Particularly if ultimately we get some third-party data that says there's a lot of use of force, right? Which I'm not suggesting that is what we will get, but just throwing it out there as an example, marrying it together with this, then that really becomes, an opportunity.
I'm going to suggest our use of force report responses reporting will go up next year based on how stringent I have now made it, because now I shouldn't say, I don't know how stringent it was before, but now it's very clear to everybody that there will be one done every time. If anything beyond that compliant handcuffing, it will be done.
I'd also like to accent what Winnie had said, to definitely second that as well, that it's a solution that I have felt would be great for a very long time now too, would be having an accessible mental health crisis worker 24/7 for law enforcement. And I know that if I'm not mistaken, and Mo, correct me, because you would probably know this before I would, but I remember going with you to present to the Governor's Opioid Coordination Council, the embedded crisis workers that were at the time at Vermont State Police, but also St. Albans Police Department. And if I'm not mistaken, we were one of very few across the state that had that partnership. So the value of it was seen statewide, and that was a few good, probably 4 years ago. But it is something that I wonder moving forward how much we can influence seeing that happen, where it is a 24/7 partner and resource for law enforcement, because we know the need is there.
I think we're a ways away, and the only reason I say that is because they just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was talking to Dr. Broer, who's the one that headed it up for Franklin County and still does. And my understanding is they finally passed, the state passed for 10 positions. So there's going to be 10 positions coming out. So 10 is going to give one day shift position at each barracks. So there's 250 agencies in the state of Vermont. So that's not even a drop in the bucket. So the chances of us who have had a day shift position now for 5 years of getting a night shift position, I mean, I don't know how long that is, but for 10, there's gonna be 10 positions to share in 250 agencies that are funded. I don't know. I praise NCSS every week because I can't believe they funded this for all these years because nobody else is willing to do it.
Right. So essentially we were penalized because we already had it. And so the states
exactly
don't need to fund you because you're already doing it on the backs of your own budget.
It's unbelievable. Exactly how I look at it. You were penalized for funding this. So to answer Melinda's question, yeah, I don't know. I'd like to say the floodgates are open. Here comes the positions. They're going to fill us all up with them, but I just don't see it happening, unfortunately.
So I think this is a great example though, too. And because I'm at NCSS, and I'm part of the leadership team, I don't know that I do think we put one proposal into one care, but this is also a great example of when you're looking at health and population health. We have a health service area and there are funding and incentive dollars that are put into our community bucket. And if these are things that are going to ultimately impact our health populations, that we go to also those mechanisms to say, like, you want to see healthy Franklin County residents, you want to see reduced rates in mental health, you want to see increase in partnerships. This is an example of something that needs to be funded. So it's another.
Yeah, I'd be glad to go down. I've testified down there 50 times. I'd go down again over and over, but it's falling. It is not falling on deaf ears. It's just there's only so much money in the state of Vermont, and COVID is not helping any of us. But with the money issue, so we need more. I get it. The officers are trained in mental health, but again, it's not as much as they should be. Nobody ever is. And like I've said before many times, we'll never be trained to the level that the NCSS experts are. They are the ones we should have with us. And that's just my answer to that. But anyway, we can go through the slides if you want, or I can talk mental health all day because that's been my life for 5 years. This is what I've done. So.
Right. No, well, then it also makes me think about we've looked at and done some work around having substance use providers also partner with law enforcement. And there are some areas of the state. I invited Commander Prouty years ago to present Project Vision and what they've done. And I also recently had a meeting with Stephanie Thompson and also with Michael Johnson from the Springfield area, because they have embedded recovery coaches now. They've embedded with law enforcement, which has been my dream to have happen in this community, and I'm not giving up on it. I'm working with them to try to find the same funding sources that they've used, and they've been, we've been working really closely on it. But I think, again, Winnie had made a comment, and I think our last board meeting too, making mention of having those professionals, and she said it again tonight, the mental health professional, and also we still need to have those substance use professionals available. And it does need to be a service that is 24/7, and whether it's somebody's on call or it's a position that is physically in partnership and at the barracks. But I know that's been a goal of our community, because we've already recognized that could be a great piece of solution to bring to the table when people are struggling with substance use, because not only do we want to make sure they get the opportunity for help, but we don't want to miss that window, because sometimes the window of willingness can be small. So timing is of the essence. So I know that as a community, that's something we're looking at as well. I'm looking at the clock and seeing that it's 6:19 right now. So, and I hate to stop this conversation, because this is my favorite, is starting to dig into some ideas of solution and direction to go. But I do want to esteem the agenda and give the opportunity for the public comment. What we will do again is I'm going to be messaging this group to schedule a meeting that we can start really sifting through some of that data together with Danielle's guidance using RBA. And I want to thank Danielle again for giving us the awareness of what results-based accountability is and looks like, and how it can be used to better bring results to the work that this group does. And then I'll also be connecting to change the next board meeting to a day of the week and week of the month that would work best and be strategic for us. So any last questions for Mo before I turn it over for public comment? Okay, Mo, thank you so much for being present. I really appreciate the clarity that you bring when we're looking at this data, because it's one thing to see it. It's way, to me, way more valuable to hear a little bit of the backstory on this is why we say what we say, or why we have what we have, and where some of the, maybe just to clarify any confusion that people may have. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll clarify what I can, and I will talk to you next month.
Great, thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Mo.
Thank you for sharing your screen, Jamie. I think we'll pull up the team. Here we go, and see who's on. I did see earlier, Zach had put a link in the chat. I want to thank you for doing that, Zach, and for anybody who didn't have an opportunity to notice that was pasted there, definitely feel free to copy and paste that. The more information we can get, the better. And at this juncture, I want to open the floor to anybody who's joined us from the public that would like to make comments or give feedback. This is a very valuable piece for those of us who are on the board, because we want to serve the community in the best way possible. The more voices we have, the better. And there's Zach's hand. Great. Thank you, Zach. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah. Hey, y'all. Thanks for being here. First off, I appreciate the discussion a whole bunch, and I only have a couple minutes. I want to try to be brief. I just want to think about the reason of the formation of this board, reminder of the community pressure behind its creation, the ongoing concerns about, inequitable experiences people of color, women, people with disabilities we're having with the police, and a shared experience of over policing. Police were there when they're not needed, escalating the situation, and generally a feeling of a lack of accountability for the history of the police department, abuse of police officers, et cetera. So I just want to say that moving forward, I think it's important to recognize that Winnie said at the last meeting, a public safety or a police department that better reflects its community is what we need here, the needs of the community. And I don't know how we get there without data. And the data also needs to be good data. And I'm really grateful, Danielle, for your experience with this, with the results-based accountability stuff. From what I can gather from that, it seems like a really helpful framework and tool for that. So I'm interested in how that gets applied to data from the St. Albans Police Department. I would just generally say that I see, and this was brought up, I'll share it to the group email. I was listening to a radio piece from VPR, and they had, I believe it was a UVM professor, and she is working with the advisory board down in Burlington, or the police commissioner board, Stephanie Seguino. And one thing that she mentioned was that it's not, the public isn't the only person to benefit from good data. The police also benefit. And how she illustrated that was, she encouraged officers to change their policies around, or police departments to change their policies around officer instruction and ongoing education, to use the data for leaders in the department, for police chiefs to have one-on-one conversations with officers when they see trends in the data going in a direction that's either harmful to the community or not optimal for the department. An example would be, obviously incidents, or implicit bias incidents, et cetera. So I just want to push back on this idea that, and language that I've heard used in city council and other places, where any sunlight or any daylight on this data, and any data is punitive for the police. It can be a really great tool, feedback to see how their officers are doing. But more importantly, it illustrates what's being done by the police department. For instance, I have some data. The department was awesome. They provided all those spreadsheets, and we saw one of them. I don't think that data is particularly useful. It's not arranged in a way that's easily manipulable. It's messy, at least in the form that we were given it. And, just looking at some pie charts from previous years, 2019, say, and I'll share this with the group email, just what the police department is responding to. 44% motor vehicle stuff, a lot of wellness checks, like 20% of their stuff is wellness checks. A very small amount of what they're being responding to is crime. So if we can, I feel like if we can get that initial data set, full well knowing that there's not an accountability structure in place right now to make sure that data is good. I think that as an iterative piece, the data is very important. I would suggest to the board here, maybe to request from the police department, what are the data points that are being collected, and maybe propose some additions for this, just to get some sunlight on what's being collected, and probably can see that from the spreadsheet. So to sum up, I think the data is important. I think it's going to tell us and inform us how the police department is serving the community, or how community could be better served in cases of, getting people the increased mental health response care they need, public welfare checks, etc. So the data part is big, and I would just impress to the board to stress that the data is beneficial to the public and to the police department as well. It increases the efficacy of ongoing education. Thank you so much. That was a little long, but thank you.
Melinda, is it okay if I say something to Zach's
Absolutely.
comment? Zach, I'm so grateful for your commentary, because I wholeheartedly agree. And I work in an industry where the data it's mandatory now that it's public facing, but the notion is that it allows us to provide better services to our patients and to our community. So the idea would be the same for the police. And I think Mo has been somewhat transparent. He recognizes that there are gaps in the data, and so far what we have seen is that he's looking for us to make those demands and requests of things we would like to see and help figure out how to get it. So I do think that the whole committee is invested in, the whole board is invested in getting us there. So any additional and granular suggestions that you have, please include them in your emails to us, because it will be super helpful for us over the coming weeks and months to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Zach. I do appreciate it. I also just put our email address in the chat just in case anybody wasn't aware of it. It is pab@stalbansvt.com. And I see that there's another hand up. Angela? Hi, Angela.
Hi. Thanks. I've learned a lot listening in tonight, and I've forgotten all the acronyms and all the language already too. My baby has a cold and has been crawling all over me. But when we first started going over the helpful framework for assessing the issue, what is it? RBD? DRB?
RBA.
Yeah.
Okay.
For results-based accountability. It takes a while to learn the acronyms, so.
Results-based accountability. There was a moment where there was kind of it made me reflect in a very broadest way. What are we looking at in terms of the data? The data is what we need to come back to. It's the only thing we know for sure if we feel like we have good data. And it's about police interactions with the community. And there are so many ways that we can analyze whether those interactions are going the way we think they need to or not. I think we should go ahead with that. I also just want to say, I hope that the advice coming from our community to the police also has something to do with trying to, and I think we've been talking about this with the mental health professionals being involved. How do we reduce the numbers of interactions between community members and police? How do we have as light a footprint as possible with police presence, and not, of course, to neglect all the different needs that the police might be trying to meet in our community, but to reallocate our focus to resources that our community really needs instead of police. And also, I think a goal for our police force, or for an advisory board, a good goal could be to actually provide a really good way to receive thorough feedback on community police interactions. I have had a veterinarian called me and to see how my cat was doing the very next day after they gave her some medicine. I mean, a call, you've got the number, the people you interacted with, you know, a call from a compassionate community member with resources and understanding of something like recovery and mental health and poverty might be a great way to actually collect feedback that could be helpful for our community and police force. So I just wanted to say those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. I love that. I had to take some notes here because I think that that's a fantastic points. Thank you both so much, Zach and Angela. We are actually slightly over. So in the interest of keeping with our time, I'm going to be closing out the meeting, but we'll, as I said, be reaching out to the board so we can set up the next meeting, which will more than likely be on a different day and week of the month. But I'm super grateful for especially the community members that are showing up to these meetings, because our biggest goal right now, or I don't want to speak for our whole board, but I believe, you know, our biggest goal is to get as much feedback as we can, to hear as many voices as we can, because, you know, our goal, as I read the mission, and I'll be doing that every single meeting, starting with that mission, and that our goal is to make suggestions that are going to benefit our community as a whole. And we can't do that in a balanced way without hearing all of the voices of our community members. So, and I'm extremely grateful to this board too for showing up tonight, for your participation. It's been another 100% attendance, which is exciting. And I really look forward to doing this work with this group. I encourage the public again to reach out and use that email address, the pab@stalbans.com for bt.com. And send us your feedback, your thoughts, your suggestions. That's what we're all about. Is we're not saying we're all the professionals, the community is the professional. So how can we get all the voices we need and come to a balance and help our community to be a healthier, safer place? So I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. And at this juncture, we will close out the meeting and we will see you next time.